The monsoon rain has let up and the summer vacation season has begun here in South Korea. But things are not so sunny on the nation's diplomatic front. Japan is likely to slap further trade restriction against South Korea within this week, while North Korea has fired 2 short-range ballistic missiles last week. President Moon Jae-in and other high-ranking officials have canceled their summer break in efforts to resolve the diplomatic conundrum. Today, we go in-depth on the pending issues Korea faces with Dr. Hyun-wook, professor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. It's always good to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
North Korea, after firing its short-range ballistic missiles, continues to lash out at South Korea and the U.S. over the 2 allies' joint military drills, calling it a practice of war. But it looks like it's putting more blame on South Korea. Why?
It doesn't want to break the negotiation and dialogue frame with the United States. I mean, either side would not want to break the frame. I mean, the USA does not want to break the dialogue frame with North Korea either. That's why I think North Korea recently shot the long-range missiles, no, short-range missiles, even though it's ballistic, but it's short-range missiles. So it's not crossing over the red line that it has, promised with President Trump, that it would not shoot and launch ICBMs and even ILBMs and nuclear weapon tests. That's the promise that Kim Jong-un made with the United States. But nevertheless, I think, throughout these kinds of missile testing, North Korea is trying to pressure President Trump so that the pre-working level conditions will be something that will benefit North Korea rather than the United States. And at this juncture, I think the role of the South Korea is pretty much minimized now. Things that total entire dialogue phase has begun by the initiative of South Korea. But right now, I don't think from the North Korean perspective, there's not much that South Korea can do for the North Korea's interests. Even some of the things published in North Korea, I think it was a stamp, some ceremonial stamp of, DMZ meeting. I think President Moon Jae-in was not on the stamp. Only President Trump and Kim Jong-un's face was in there. So kind of signifies that North Korea does not want to face South Korea in dealing with talks with the United States.
So you do think that North Korea is trying to gain an upper hand prior to the planned working level talks to gain an upper hand?
Yeah, I think what is important for North Korea is definitely to lift the sanctions. But I don't think the demands by North Korea for sanction lifting to the United States is not something appropriate with the level of denuclearization that is on the process. I mean, some of the demands by North Korea, sanction lifting, which is the UN Security Council sanction resolutions, something from the US perspective, I think it should be something appropriate if North Korea is almost in a level of denuclearizing itself, even nuclear warheads and even ICBM, things like that. But what North Korea proposes to the United States in exchange is only the dismantling of sanctions, dismantling of Yongbyon facilities, which from the U.S. perspective does not make sense at all. So I think that kinds of gaps between two countries is still continuing to exist now.
Now, Germany, which is the chair of the UN Security Council DPRK Sanctions Committee, has condemned North Korea's missile launches. Do you expect further actions from the United Nations?
I think the German representative talked and announced something, that is right in principle. But I don't think he can do much more than that. I mean, the sanctions implementation is pretty much controlled and swayed by the United States. And from the President Trump's perspective, I think what is important for him is domestic political issues and phase. And from that background, I don't think President Trump would not do anything further to instigate North Korea. If something happens, Kim Jong-un might do something stupid, testing of nuclear weapons, something which would be another headache for President Trump in facing general election period. So I think there has been some of the principles announced by United Nations Security Council, but I think it will be not easy for any further implementation of extra sanctions on North Korea.
So not more sanctions are expected.
I don't think so.
Now, U.S. President Trump has downplayed Pyongyang's missile launches, calling them very standard. But others in the U.S. are voicing concerns that we do need to be worried about North Korea's missile launches. What's your take?
Yes, I think North Korea is developing its missile technologies and also increasing its nuclear warheads and also the quantity of nuclear warheads. So I think it's very worrisome from our perspective. From the South Korean perspective, the fact that North Korean weapon system is getting better and better is something that is definitely worrisome to the security of South Korea. But I think from President Trump's perspective, it doesn't really matter. I mean, after Hanoi summit, President Trump realized that there's not much sincerity he can expect from Kim Jong-un on his denuclearization move. And after that, President Trump's policy towards North Korea is just managing and controlling Kim Jong-un's behavior so that he would not do something stupid. So I think there's some kind of gaps that we perceive in our security terms, and the U.S. feels. So I think there will be some kinds of problematic issues later on.
Now to the Seoul-Tokyo relations that is perhaps at its worst level in recent memory. South Korean Trade Minister Yoo Myung-hee, after wrapping up her 4-day trip to Washington, held a briefing this afternoon, and she said the U.S. agrees that Japan's export curbs set a dangerous precedent and that the restrictions will hurt American firms as well. In fact, she said that American firms wrote her a letter saying that they're starting to feel the impact of Japan's curbs themselves. What kind of role do you expect the U.S. to play in resolving the matter?
I think, yes, she met a lot of good people, important people in Washington, D.C., think tank experts, and also Commerce Secretary, and also someone who is in charge of diplomatic committee in Congress. But what they told her is all the principles of the United States, what the U.S. experts and U.S. government officials are feeling about the current issues. Of course, yeah, it's true that the Japanese are using economic policies for the sake of political issues, and this would definitely have some negative impact on the international economic situations. Also, will be a big harm to the trilateral cooperation between U.S., Japan, Korea. But what is important is then what would the U.S. do after next? I mean, would there be any kinds of implementation by the United States, any kinds of real direct arbitration between Japan and Korea? I think that will be the important issues. But so far, many of the government people and even President Trump mentioned about possibility of arbitration very difficult. I mean, there will be no direct arbitration and mediation. So I think if that's the case of the U.S. position, I think the current conflict between Japan and Korea would continue for a while in the future.
So we're facing a long-term conflict between Seoul and Tokyo, and the U.S. is unlikely to make any dramatic arbitration into the matter. Now, South Korean, Japanese, and U.S. lawmakers met in Washington, D.C. last week to discuss Japan's export curbs against South Korea. What did you make of that meeting?
Yes, Japanese lawmakers argued that the export curb policies is not relevant to the forced labor issues, and the U.S. also made it clear that there will be no direct mediation by the United States. So even though they have met and talked, I don't think there was any clues that the current conflict between Japan and Korea will be solved in the near future. I think the trilateral lawmakers meeting only confirmed their separate positions. And I think it will be much more important for us to think about what kinds of solutions we have to have in our hands in dealing with the United States and Japan, rather than holding a haphazard, meetings, many meetings, which is meaningless with no outcome and solutions.
Now, according to Japan's Sankei Shimbun today, Japan is not willing to hold summit talks with South Korea until South Korea comes up with a constructive measure on the issue of wartime forced labor. It appears Japan has the upcoming UN General Assembly in mind. How do you see this?
I think Japan, many experts expected that after the, upper parliamentarians elections, Japanese position might be a little bit different, kind of soothed down, softer. That's what some of the experts were expecting. But I think there has not been much change. I mean, the Japanese Prime Minister Abe is trying to use current phase and situations for his domestic political goals. I mean, what is different from the past is now the Japanese public's sentiment is different from the past. They support Prime Minister Abe. They criticize South Korean positions. Before, whenever history issues and labor issues and comfort women issues arose, the Japanese public was kind of not willing to criticize Korea much because they know that they had the original criminals. So they did not criticize. But this time, they think that, okay, things have changed, that this is something that Korean Supreme Court verdict has been finalized, which means that there will be no other ways and rules for arbitration and negotiation between Japan and Korea. So a lot of Japanese public is now criticizing Korea rather than Japan. So Prime Minister Abe is trying to use these kinds of, Japanese public's positive opinions towards himself and trying to use this for his, domestic political objectives, for example, revising constitutions, things like that. So I don't think, there will be much change in Prime Minister Abe's position on South Korea, unless, as they said, that unless South Korea respects Supreme Court's verdict, but separately admits that the forced labor issue has been already solved in 1965 agreement. I think that's something that the Japanese government is requesting to South Korean government.
Now, many are pointing to the fact that Japan's latest measures are weakening security ties among South Korea, the U.S., and Japan, citing China and Russian military aircraft's intrusion into the Korea Air Defense Identification Zone last week. Would this have any effect on Japan's stance?
Yes. This is a very good opportunity for China to weaken the U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy. U.S., Japan, Korea, trilateral cooperation has been a very important backbone to deal with China in the past and in history, but now Japan-Korea relationship is not good. So I think from China's stance, China has been always recently looking for any kinds of, weak links that by which China can, weaken the U.S. bashing on China. One of the ways that it did was visiting Pyongyang, and throughout, expanding its influence on North Korea, China wants to kind of find some holes that it can kind of weaken the, U.S. bashing on China. Another hole that it is now trying to find is Japan-Korea relationship. Japan-Korea relationship is getting weakened. Now, I think China thinks that South Korea is becoming another weak point for China to use in dealing with U.S. policy on China. So I think the current Japan-South Korea conflict is, giving some upper hand to China in dealing with the United States.
So you think Japan understands that, and it would have some kind of positive effect on Japan?
I think Japan thinks that U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy is a little bit different from the past. I mean, the Quad countries, for example, U.S., Japan, India, and Australia are the center and core of the Indo-Pacific strategy of the United States. Before, there were no countries like that. It was US, Japan, Korea trilateralism. But now they have quad countries. So I think from the Japanese perspective, it has another, US-based system by which they can pressure China rather than utilizing US, Japan, Korea, trilateralism. So I think from the Japanese perspective, it can be a core country in US Indo-Pacific strategies, but at the same time, trying to use the conflict between Japan and Korea for Prime Minister Abe's domestic political goals.
All right, thank you as always, Dr. Kim, for your insights.
Thank you very much.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you right back here, same time tomorrow.